and Happy New Year! Uta Hagen here of Trans Widow, Uta Hagen YouTube channel, and WordPress blog, utahagengrasswidow.wordpress.com. That link is always in the notes. You will notice what I think is a daffodil. It might be one of my new white daffodils that I planted 200 of this fall. No, 100 of this fall. And what happened was, because the weather was kind of unseasonably warm, this one started growing, and I decided to dig it up. So I have hopes, because we see a bud here, that it will bloom, despite the fact that as I dug it up, I damaged the bulb. I sliced off a bit of the bulb. And my other show and tell is my famous birdseed heart cookies, which I think the squirrels eat. But this is my philosophy when I'm making rollout cookies, like sugar cookies or butter cookies, or this was a ginger snaps recipe. I don't re-roll the scraps. I typically just throw them away because I think the dough becomes tough. And I guess it might not become tough if you use cake flour for part of the flour, but I couldn't find that this time. And so I saved all the scraps and then rolled birdseed into them and hung them like this. One of my nature shorts videos is of the evergreen tree that I had hung a few of these on. I'm going to go out after this and walk past that and see what has happened. Also, I didn't do any videos or photos of this, but I made a few popcorn and cranberry chains, and some I hung up in a weeping cherry that I have in my front yard. And at first, nobody was really touching them. The birds pecked at them a little bit. But I thought, well, that was a flop. And then I woke up one morning and they're all eaten. Now, I'm imagining that probably a clever squirrel came and ate them all up, or perhaps a deer. Okay, so I'm going to continue with this idea of conflict of interest, which in the medical literature is known by the acronym COI. And the National Academy of Medicine, as I mentioned in my last video, has standards to avoid conflicts of interest for researchers, such they should reveal if they have some kind of financial interest in the pharmaceuticals companies or the medical instrument company that is producing the thing that they are researching. And there is also such a thing as intellectual conflict of interest, which, of course, Johanna Olson-Kennedy, Marci Bowers, Rachel Richard Levine, and all of those sort of medical trained people and psychologically trained people are exhibiting, because if they've been working in the field for a long time and not taking the input of anyone else in the manner that WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, is doing, they do not take input from anyone else. They basically make up stuff to counter the evidence-based information that, for example, the Cass review that came out last spring, almost going on a year ago, in the UK, revealed that there is no sound evidence-based for the use of puberty blockers in minors and for the use of wrong sex hormones after the puberty blockers. And even Dr. Hilary Cass, the leading pediatrician of the UK, who is now Dame Dr. Hilary Cass, said that even social transition is problematic. And what I wish that she had said was more about how this transition affirmative care is actually distracting from potentially severe psychological and psychiatric problems that the patient has, which stem from childhood trauma and abuse. And I am going to start relating this to, I think, the story, if she gives me permission, of a detransitioner who's a young adult who was damaged simply by a couple of years of testosterone injections. And, the risks that these doctors are instigating in their patients are unconscionable. This is also known as iatrogenic harm, that is, the treatment causing harm. Now, I think the last time I went into the fact that, for example, Dr. Marci Bowers, who was the famous Jazz Jennings surgeon who messed up that boy's urinary tract through surgery, just in 2023 accrued $1 million in income from doing exactly those damaging surgeries. And of course, he famously appeared in Matt Walsh's film, What is a Woman? So the National Academy of Medicine defines financial conflicts of interest as activities that include clinical services from which a committee member derives a substantial proportion of his or her income, and serving as a paid expert witness. Dan Karasik, a psychiatrist who chaired the mental health chapter, I guess this was of WPATH, and Lauren Schechter, a surgeon who co-led the surgery chapter, again, in the, this is the Standards of Care 8 that WPATH put out, which removed all age restrictions from these dangerous treatments. They were both engaged as paid expert witnesses in federal lawsuits involving gender medicine. That means they were in the defense of the therapists and the medical practitioners when detransitioners were suing them for medical malpractice. And both had direct financial stake in Standards of Care 8 from WPATH, supporting their testimonies as expert witnesses. Karasik had said that a medical necessity statement should be added to the Standards of Care 8, which also could be paraphrased in a different name, which is how to change the sex of a child patient, which would trigger insurance coverage. And so, of course, they want insurance coverage because then their patients will find it possible to afford their expensive services. And remember, none of these have been FDA approved. They are all experimental. And then there's this Schechter person who is WPATH's current president-elect, a plastic surgeon who specializes in and gets income from gender surgery. And no conflicts of interest were declared for this Karasik and Schechter in the written statements of the SOC 8, the Standards of Care 8 from WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Now, you will notice that their constant use of the acronyms, in fact, causes people to assume that these are treatment options that have been approved by the FDA, that have some kind of foundation in evidence-based research, evidence-based proof and writings. And other authors of these standards of care 8 include Joshua Safer, Stephen Rosenthal, and Anna-Lou DeVries. She's of the famous Dutch protocols. That research funded by Ferring, Ferring, pharma company, which is in the Netherlands. Those people are among the pioneers in gender-affirming care and have spent years building up professional reputations and personal practices around this medicalized approach. Diane Ehrensaft, who also appeared in What is a Woman, published books advocating for gender transition, and royalties from books are examples of the financial remuneration that a researcher gets that causes conflict of interest, because if they have a reason to get their name out there so that people will look them up and then buy their book, and also they don't want what they say in their book to be debunked. Okay, and all of these people have served as expert witnesses in lawsuits. Oh, this is Diane Ehrensaft. Lawsuits involving social transitions in the schools. None of these clinicians have conflicts that are considered in the writing of the Standards of Care 8 significant or consequential. And so this is simply a representation of the corruption, the corruption in the field. And what has unfortunately happened is those who are in the field of psychiatry and psychology and surgery and medicine and mental health are not speaking up about this, and they are basically quiet collaborators in this iatrogenic harm. And in fact, what they do often, I know a psychiatric nurse who did this, as they saw the rising numbers of teens and young adults coming to them saying, I'm actually trans, this is my problem, this is all the other things that we talked about in my therapy previously, they can all be solved by going through so-called transition. Now, this psychiatric nurse that I had spoken to at length about this, it was interesting. Some of it was in way back in 2020. And she was at some political meetings and we were talking about this. So what she did was part of that trend of deciding, I'm not going to see teens and adolescents anymore. She was not in the field of treatment of children, but she did treat teens. And she said these kids came to her immediately wanting strong SSRIs, antidepressant drugs, things like Xanax and lorazepam, and they were in a social group that was so-called transitioning together, so that flies in the face of everything that I was told about this rare and unusual condition way back 30 years ago when I discovered my ex-husband's cross-dressing. So the capable people who should be blowing the whistle on their own field to maintain the integrity of their field are silent. And in fact, I sought therapy out at one point from this was before I started my channel. This is my therapy. I sought out some therapy for a while from a certain entity, clinic in my area that was a sort of a therapeutic treatment center, rather large, takes all the insurances and all that stuff. And um, I interviewed a couple of people from that facility, and they both said that, of course, I, Uta Hagen, trans widow, would have to refer to Nettie in Nettie's new female name in the therapy for myself, where Nettie is not even in the county. And of course, I would have to recognize this was only implied, it wasn't said directly to me, but I would have to recognize that Nettie is the true victim here. And I'm just complaining about the past when he committed financial fraud to get out of paying child support twice, and when he defamed me, and when he criticized me in front of my children, basically since they were old enough to talk. I needed to put that to the side and educate myself. So I said, well, you're fired. I wrote them a letter. I actually wrote them a letter. Didn't expect to get any reply. Told them all the details about my discoveries of Nettie's cross-dressing and his fake business trips, and how people thought or were basically told by him to assume that he's our children's mother. I gave them all of those details and said, this is why I will never do therapy with you. And if any other trans widows seek help with you, you need to recommend them to some older practitioner in the area who is not going to force them gaslighting in therapy for themselves. And what I have to say is, I've really worked with cognitive behavior therapy, changing around my rumination, which was mostly about money and my worries about money, understandably, and focus on my schedule of wellness movements, exercises. Please do look at the channel. I'm committing myself to doing it twice a day now because I find that it helps me so much. Together with the stick walking, with the Lecky sticks, Leki. They're not expensive. They last a long time, and they give you a more brisk walk and put you in a more upright position where you can really see the sky and see the trees and enjoy all of nature. And of course, all of us should be committed to healthy eating and cultivating very good sleep habits. And all of those things that I just mentioned should actually be the first approach that any kind of therapist says. I don't think there should even be gender therapists. I don't think this should be a specialty at all. Therapy is therapy. You need to talk about your past, but you need to make your plans to do the healthy exercise and eating and sleeping habits. And that is what will take your brain away from the rumination of trauma. So now I must go and place this last birdseed cookie out on the tree and make my observations about the popcorn and cranberry chain that I put out there, as well as the dozen or so, or maybe 2 dozen of the other birdseed cookies. So please do, if you are a trans widow, do contact me through the blog. If you have a story about this in your family, please do contact me about the conversations you have with family members. I want to expand my profiles to detransitioners, and I do really want to collect more trans widows profiles. I continue to work on my next book. That's part of the discipline I must get myself more involved with. I prefer to be outside. All right, you do take care, and we will see you the next time. Next year, I think next year will bring good uh, events, good events for all of us.